Give us a chance to reflect a little bit on who we are. They always do, every 2, every 4 years, and you begin by just hoping we don't take for granted the fact that we even have these elections. I mean, look around the world, there are elections in other countries, but they're not really elections. I mean, they call them that, but they're not really free and open and fair. Not everyone's allowed to run. You can't say anything you want. We just had an election in Venezuela recently where the opposition candidate could only be on television 3 minutes a day, but Hugo Chavez could be on television on command. Is that a fair election? I don't think so. So we're blessed to have real elections, and we're grateful to have them, and we are blessed. But it's more than that. I hope we're reminded, because it's easy. Look, I was born in the United States. I haven't known anything but this. My whole life, I have grown up in a country that's been prosperous, free, and peaceful. And I understand that that puts not just me, but all of us in an extraordinarily small minority of people who have ever lived. If you think about the 6,000 years of recorded human history, the number of people that have ever had the kind of life we have is almost non-existent. And it's just a very small number of people in the course of human history. Almost anyone who's ever lived has lived under tyranny, either under a king, or under an emperor, or under a dictator. In essence, the enormous and vast majority of people who have ever lived have had no role to play in the people who lead them. It's worse. Almost everyone who's ever lived has been poor. And I don't just mean poor, I mean trapped in poverty. If your father did a certain job, that was your job. If you grew up in a certain family, you did whatever that family did, with no hope of moving ahead in life. And that's been the human condition. That's been the rule, not the exception, for almost the entire course of history and in many parts of the world today. When that started to change, and I don't just say this because I'm an American, I say it because it's the truth. It is a fact, a verifiable historical fact, that began to change a little bit over 220 some odd years ago on this continent, when a group of what then were brilliant men came up, not just came up, but put down on paper the belief that every single person, every human being has certain rights, and that the source of those rights is not your government, your laws, or your leaders. It's God. That you're born with these rights. And that in fact any government that denies you these rights is illegitimate. And from that has flourished a couple of things. One is our extraordinary political freedoms, but the other is our extraordinary economic freedoms. Because when you believe everyone is created equal truthfully, that everyone has rights that they are born with, and should be able to go as far as they are supposed to be allowed to go, as far as they've been created to go, there has to be an economic system that reflects that makes that possible. And that's the American free enterprise system. And the result is undeniable. Look around us. Look at every generation of American is left the next better off. Ovid just talked about his experience. But that's mine and that's yours. You can't walk anywhere in this country without bumping into somebody whose life is so dramatically better than the way their parents lived just 2 or 3 decades ago. Now that's a universal hope of parents everywhere. Every father and every mother wants to leave their kids better off. But it's almost always been impossible. You're almost always trapped in the circumstances of your birth. But not here. And a big part of that was our free enterprise system. Because it works. Because it's based on the idea that if you have a good idea and are willing to work hard, you should be able to go as far as that will take you. I would say, not only does it work, it's been revolutionary. There are millions of people around the world today that have emerged from poverty because they've copied us. Because they've created their version of free enterprise. And yet, despite its extraordinary success, we have to debate it every 2 or 4 years. Despite its extraordinary success, there are still people in American politics that don't believe in it. And even worse, don't understand it. And unfortunately, many of those people reside in the Democratic Party. And they run for office, and sometimes they win. And so you want to know what's at stake here in New Hampshire in this governor's race? It's your stake of that free enterprise system. Because your opponent, from everything I've read, and from the chuckles from the audience, is clearly someone who's not a believer in the free enterprise system. Doesn't make them bad people, it just makes them wrong. And it makes them wrong. So, I care about these governor's races because this is where it happens. Washington is a great place to make big public policy, no national stuff. But where the rubber meets the road is at the state level, because I served in the state level. I was a state legislator for 9 years. In Tallahassee, Florida. And I saw how the innovations come from there. You want to reform the education system? You have to do that from the state capitol. You want to know where real economic competition is happening? It's between the states. States are constantly changing their laws and lowering regulations and barriers because they want a business to relocate from Massachusetts to New Hampshire. Or vice versa, unfortunately. Although I don't think so, right? And my point is that that's where it really, those are the incubators of true innovation. Look around our country today at the different office holders that are in the governor's mansions who are leading the way on innovation, on putting the government in its proper role, and the results that it's having in places like Ohio and in places like Florida with our governor. My point to you is these races matter. They can do things in real time that we just talk about in Washington sometimes. And that's why it's important that these elections go in our direction. That's why it's important that we elect governors like Ovid who believe in the free enterprise system and who understand it. Because what's at stake here is our prosperity and our future. Let me tell you why that's important. Because if America is diminished, the world is going to be a very scary place. There is nothing out there to replace us. There isn't. There isn't any other country. There isn't any other organization. I promise you it's not the United Nations. There is nothing out there that can stand in the place that we have, the role that we have played for the last century. There is no country out there that serves as a shining example. Do you realize that no matter where you live in the world, there is someone just like you here in this country who's been able to do here what they would never been able to do there? You can travel any country on this planet, and you will find someone who has a relative or a friend who came to America and exceeded the circumstances of their birth. I often joke with people. People were asking me, because unfortunately the birthplace of my parents, the birthplace of Governor Sununu in Cuba, is under a dictatorship. And I said, you know why I know the Castro regime is bad? Because the most successful Cubans in the world don't live in Cuba. And so what does that tell you about? But if we're diminished, if we backtrack from that, there's nothing out there to take our place. And even on the foreign policy realm, you are seeing the impact of it now. When America does not lead, foreign policy turns into chaos. These other countries have no idea what to do. There's no way they can come together. Look, we can't solve all the problems of the world. These problems have to be solved by nations that come together and work together to solve them. But those coalitions have to be put together. And only America has the economic, military, and moral might to do that. And my fear is that many in the Democrat Party and this president are afraid to do that out of some sort of guilt, out of some sort of belief that somehow a strong America offends people and takes the world backwards. That is the thought process that we're running against at every level of government, from school boards to state capitals to Washington, D.C. And I'm telling you, the backbone of our party is these state houses across the country. It is there where you are seeing our principles be put into practice. For as gridlocked as Washington has been, certainly since the time I've been there in the last year, but even before, we are seeing real innovation at the state level. It is the places where we are able to put our principles of limited government and free enterprise into work. And that work turns into prosperity. And that's why these races are so critical. Because in so many ways, what you guys are going to help decide here